Incoherent music with a lot of electronic screams. Around the ride, the market stalls were coming back, rebuilt from a tower of fresh sawed lumber stacked in the parking lot. This was a lot more efficient, with gangs of vendors quickly sawing the lumber to standard sizes, slapping each one with a positional sensor, then watching the sensor's lights to tell them when it was properly lined up with its mates, and then slipping on corner clips that held it all together. Suzanne watched as a whole market stall came together this way, in the space of 5 minutes, before the vendors moved on to their next stall. It was like a high-tech version of an Amish barn raising, performed by bandana-clad sketchy hawkers instead of bearded technophobes. She found Perry inside, leaning over a printer. Tinkering with its guts. LED torches clipped to the temples of his glasses. He was hampered by having only one good arm, and he pressed her into service, passing him tools for a good 15 minutes before he straightened up and really looked at her. "You come down to help out. To write about it." Actually. The room was a hive of activity. A lot of goth kids of various ages and degrees of freakiness, a few of the squatter kids, some people she recognized from the second coming of Death Waits. She cool DNTC Death Waits, though. Well, that's good. He powered up the printer and the air filled with the familiar smell of saran wrap in a microwave. She had an eerie flashback to her first visit to this place, when they showed her how they could print mutated Warhol-ised Barbie heads. How's Lester getting on with cracking that printer? Why don't you ask him yourself? She didn't say it. She didn't know why Lester had come to her place after the flood instead of going home, why he stiffened up and sniffed when she mentioned Perry's name, why he looked away when she mentioned Hilda. Something about firmware. He straightened his back more, making it pop, and gave her his devilish grin, the one where his wonky eyebrow went up and down. "It's always firmware," he said, and laughed a little. Maybe they were both remembering those old days. "The boogie-woogie Elmos, looks like you've got a lot of help," Suzanne said, getting out a little steno pad and a pen. Perry nodded at it, and she was struck by how many times they stood like this, a few feet apart, her pen poised over her pad. She chronicled so much of this man's life. They good people, these folks. Some of them have some carpentry or electronics experience, the rest are willing to learn. It's going faster than I thought it would. Lots of support from out in the world, 2 people sending in cash to help with replacement parts. Have you heard from Kettlewell or Jan? The light went out of his face. No, he said. How about from the lawyers? No comment. He said. It didn't sound like a joke. Come on, Perry. People are starting to ask questions. Someone's going to write about this. Do you want your side told or not? Not, he said, and disappeared back into the guts of the printer. She stared at his back for a long while before turning on her heel. Muttering, "Fuck," and walking back out into the sunshine. There'd been a musty smell in the ride, but out here it was the Florida smell of citrus and car fumes, and sweat from the people around her, working hard, trying to wrest a living from the world. She walked back across the freeway to the shanty town and ran into Hilda coming the other way. The younger woman gave her a cool look and then looked away, and crossed. That was just about enough. Suzanne thought. Enough playtime with the kids. Time to go find some grown-ups. She wasn't here for her health. If Lester didn't want to hang out with her, if Perry had had enough of her, it was time to go do something else. She went back to her room, where Lester was still working on his job project. She took out her suitcase and packed with the efficiency of long experience. Lester didn't notice. Not even when she took the blouse she hand-washed and hung to dry on the back of his chair, folded it and put it in her suitcase and zipped it shut. She looked at his back working over the bench for a long time. He had a 6-pack of chocolate pudding beside him, and a wastebasket overflowing with food wrappers and boxes. He shifted in his seat and let out a soft fart. She left. She paid the landlady through the end of the week. She could send Lester an email later. The cab took her to Miami. It wasn't until she got to the airport that she realized she had no idea where she was going. Boston. San Francisco. Petersburg. She opened her laptop and began to price out last-minute tickets. The rush of travelers moved around her and she was jostled many times. The standby sites gave her 1,000 options: Miami to JFK to Heathrow to Petersburg. Miami to Frankfurt to Moscow to Petersburg. Miami to Dallas to San Francisco. The permutations were overwhelming, especially since she wasn't sure where she wanted to be. Then she heard something homey and familiar, a large group of Russian tourists walking past, talking loudly in Russian, complaining about the long flight, the bad food, and the incompetence of their tour operator. She smiled to see the old men with their high-waisted pants and the old women with their bouffant hair. She couldn't help but eavesdrop at their volume. She would have been hard-pressed not to listen in. A little boy and girl tore ass around the airport, under the disapproving glares from DHS goons, and they screamed as they ran. Disney World. Disney World. Disney World. She'd never been to a couple of the kitschy gulag parks in Russia, and she'd grown up with Six Flags coaster parks and Ontario Place and the CNE in Toronto, not far from Detroit. But she'd never been to the big one, the place that even now managed to dominate the world's consciousness of theme parks. She asked her standby sites to find her a room in a Disney hotel instead, looking for an inclusive rate that would get her onto the rides and pay for her meals. These were advertised at roadside kiosks at 100-yard intervals on every freeway in Florida, so she suspected they were the best deal going. A moment of browsing showed her that she'd guessed wrong. A week in Disney cost a heart-stopping sum of money, the equivalent of 6 months' rent in Petersburg. How did all these Russians afford this trip? What the hell compelled people to part with these sums? She was going to have to find out. It was research. Plus she needed a vacation. She booked in, bought a bullet train ticket, and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She examined her welcome package as she waited for the train. She was staying at something called the Polynesian Resort Hotel, and the brochure showed a tiki-taki themed set of longhouses set on an ersatz white sand beach, with a crew of Mexican and Cuban domestic workers in leis. Hawaiian shirts, and lava lass waving and smiling. Her package included a complimentary luau. The pictures made it clear this was nothing like the tourist luaus she'd attended in Maui. On top of that, she was entitled to a character breakfast with a wage slave in an overheated plush costume, and an hour with a resort counselor who'd help her plan her trip for maximal fun. The bullet train came and took on the passengers, families bouncing with anticipation, joking and laughing in every language spoken. These people had just come through a U.S. customs checkpoint and they were acting like the world was a fine place. She decided there must be something to this Disney business. Death Waits waited, and waited and waited for the ride to come back online. He split his days between hanging out at home, writing about the story, running the fly-throughs from the other rides, watching what was happening in Brazil, answering his fan mail. The rest of the time he spent with his new friends down at the site of the ride, encouraging them to pitch in and help Perry and Lester to get the thing back up and running. Fast, please. It was driving him bonkers not to be able to ride any longer. After everything he'd been through, he deserved a ride. His friends were wonderful. Wonderful. Lacey especially. She was a nurse and a goddess of mercy. The money that flooded into his PayPals whenever his friends let it be known that he needed more covered all his expenses. He never wanted for companionship, conversation, helpmeets, or respect. It was a wonderful life. If only the ride would come online. He woke next to Lacey, she asleep still, her hair spread out across the pillow in a fall of shiny black with blue highlights. She'd given him a matching dye job a few days before and they looked like a matched set now. He let his hands lazily trace her soft skin, the outlines of her tattoos, her implants and piercings. He felt a stirring between his legs. Lacey yawned and woke and kissed him. "Good morning, my handsome man," she said. "Good morning, my beautiful woman. What's the plan for today?" "Whatever you want," she said. "Breakfast, then down to the ride." He said. "I'll do my email and writing there today, something before breakfast." She asked, with a lopsided smile that was adorable. "Oh yes. Please," he said, his voice breathy. The smell at the Walmart was overpowering. It was 1 part sharp mold, 1 part industrial disinfectant, a citrus smell that made your eyes water and your sinuses burn. "I've rented some big blowers," Perry said. "They'll help air the place out. If that doesn't work. I might have to resurface the floor, which would be rough. It could take a week to get that done properly, a week." Death said. "Jesus. No way. Not another week." He didn't know it for sure, but he had a feeling that a lot of these people would stop showing up eventually if there was no ride for them to geek out over. He sure would. You smell that? We can close the doors and the windows and leave it like this. Death's people, standing around them, listening in, nodded. It was true. You'd melt people's lungs if you shut them up with these fumes. How can I help? Death said. It was his constant mantra with Perry. Sometimes he didn't think Perry liked him very much, and it was good to keep on reminding him that Death and his buddies were here to be part of the solution. That Perry needed them. The roof is just about done, the robots are back online. The dividers should be done today. I've got the chairs stripped down for routine maintenance. I could use a couple people for that. What's Lester working on? Death said. You'd have to ask him. Death hadn't seen Lester in days, which was weird. He hoped Lester didn't dislike him. He worried a lot about whether people liked him these days. He thought that Sammy liked him, after all. Where is he? Don't know. Perry put dark glasses on. Death Waits took the hint. Come on, he said to Lacey, who patted him on the hand as he lifted up in his chair and rolled out to the van. Let's just call him, it's Death Waits. We re down at the ride, but there's not much to do around here. I thought maybe we could help you with whatever you were working on. What do you know about what I am working on? Lester said. Nothing, so how do you know you want to help? Death Waits closed his eyes. He wanted to help these two. They made something important. Didn't they know that? What are you working on? Nothing. Lester said. Come on. Death said. Come on. We just want to pitch in. I love you guys. You changed my life. Let me contribute. Lester snorted. Cross the road, go straight for 200 yards. Turn left at the house with the Cesar Chavez mural, and I'll meet you there. You mean go into the Death didn't know what it was called. He always tried not to look at it when he came to the ride. That slum across the road. He knew it was somehow connected with the ride, but in the same way that the administrative buildings at Disney were connected with the parks. The big difference was that Disney's extraneous buildings were shielded from view by berms and painted go-away green. The weird town across the road was right there. Yeah, across the road into the shantytown, okay. Death said. See you soon. He hung up and patted Lacey's hand. We going over there. He said, pointing into the shantytown. Is it safe? He shrugged. I guess so. He loved his chair, loved how tall it made him, loved how it turned him into a half-ton cyborg who could raise up on his rear wheels and rock back and forth like a trifid. Now he felt very vulnerable, a crippled cyborg whose apparatus cost a small fortune, about to go into a neighborhood full of people who were technically homeless. Should we drive? I think we can make it across. He said. Traffic was light, though the cars that bombed past were doing 90 or more. He started to gather up a few more of his people, but reconsidered. It was a little scary to be going into the town, but he couldn't afford to freak out Lester by showing up with an entourage. The guardrail shielding the town had been bent down and flattened, and the chair wheeled over it easily, with hardly a bump. As they crossed this border, they crossed over to another world. There were cooking smells, barbecue and Cuban spices, and a little hint of septic tank or compost heap. The buildings didn't make any sense to Death's eye. They curved or sloped or twisted or leaned and seemed to be made of equal parts prefab cement and aluminum and scrap lumber, laundry lines, power lines, and graffiti. Death was used to drawing stairs, even before he became a cyborg with a beautiful woman beside him, but this was different. There were eyes everywhere. Little kids playing in the street hadn't these people heard of stranger danger stopped to stare at him with big shoe-button eyes. Faces peered out of windows from the ground on up to the third story. Voices whispered and called. Lacey gave them her sunniest smile and even waved at the little kids, and Death tried nodding at some of the homies staring at him from the window of what looked like a little diner. Death hadn't known what to expect from this little town, but he certainly hadn't pictured so many little shops. He realized that he thought of shops as being somehow civilized, tax-paying, license-bearing entities with commercial relationships with suppliers, with cash registers and employees. Not lawless and wild. But every ground floor seemed to have at least a small shop, advertised with bright OLED pixel boards that showed rotating enticements productos de Dominica. Beautiful for ladies. Oferta. Fantasy nails. He passed 20 different shops in as many steps. Some of them seemingly nothing more than a counter recessed into the wall with a young man sitting behind it, grinning at them. Lacey stopped at one and bought them cans of coffee and small Mexican pastries dusted with cinnamon. He watched 100 pairs of eyes watch Lacey as she drew out her purse and paid. At first he thought of the danger, but then he realized that if anyone was to mug them, it would be in full sight of all these people. It was a funny thought. He'd grown up in sparse suburbs where you'd never see anyone walking or standing on the sidewalks or their porches. Even though it was a nice neighborhood. There were muggings and even killings at regular, horrific intervals. Walking there felt like taking your life into your hands. Here, in this crowded place with a human density like a Disney park, it felt somehow safer. Weird. They came to what had to be the Cesar Chavez mural, a Mexican in a cowboy hat standing like a preacher on the tailgate of a truck, surrounded by more Mexicans, farmer types in cotton shirts and blue jeans and cowboy hats. They turned left and rounded a corner into a little cul-de-sac with a confusion of hopscotches chalked onto the ground, ringed by parked bicycles and scooters. Lester stood among them, eating a churro in a piece of wax paper. "You seem to be recovering quickly," he said, sizing up Death in his chair. "Good to see it." He seemed a little distant, which Death chalked up to being interrupted. "It's great to see you again," Death said. "My friends and I have been coming by the ride every day, helping out however we can, but we never see you there, so I thought I'd call you." "You'd call me, to see if we could help," Death said. "With whatever you redoing, come in," Lester said. He gestured behind him and Death noticed for the first time the small sign that said Hotel Rothschild, with a stately peacock behind it. The door was a little narrow for his rolling chair, but he managed to get it in with a little back and forth, but once inside, he was stymied by the narrow staircase leading up to the upper floors. The lobby, such as it was completely filled by him. Lacey and Lester, and even if the chair could have squeezed up the stairs, it couldn't have cornered to get there. Lester looked embarrassed. "Sorry. I didn't think of that." Okay. I could rig a winch and hoist the chair up if you want. We'd have to belt you in, but it's doable. There are masts for pulleys on the top floor. It's how they get the beds into the upper stories. I can get up on canes." Death Waits said. "Is it safe to leave my chair outside? Though?" Lester's eyebrows went up. "Well, of course, sure it is." Death felt weird for having asked. He backed the chair out and locked the transmission, feeling silly. Who was going to hot wire a wheelchair? He was such a dork. Lacey handed him his canes and he stood gingerly. He'd been making his way to the bathroom and back on canes all week, but he hadn't tried stairs yet. He hoped Lester wasn't too many floors up. Lester turned out to be on the third floor, and by the time they reached it, Death Waits was dripping sweat and his eyeliner had run into his eyes. Lacey dabbed at him with her gauzy scarf and fussed over him. Death caught Lester looking at the two of them with a little smirk, so he pushed Lacey away and steadied his breathing with an effort. "Okay," he said. "All done, great," Lester said. "This is what I am working on. You talked to Perry about it before. Right. The Disney in a box printers. Well, I've cracked it. We can load our own firmware onto it, just stick it on a network with a PC, and the PC will find it and update it. Then it becomes an open box, it'll accept anyone's goop. You can send it your own plans." Death hadn't seen a Diab in person yet. Beholding it and knowing that he was the reason that Lester and Perry were experimenting with it in the first place made him feel a sense of excitement he hadn't felt since the goth rehab of Fantasyland began. "So how does this tie into the ride?" Death asked. "I was thinking of building rides in miniature, but at that scale, will it really impress people?" "No. I don't think so. So instead I was thinking that we could just push out details from the ride, little tabletop-sized miniatures showing a piece every day. Maybe whatever was newest. And you could have multiple feeds, like an experimental trunk for objects that people in one region liked." Lester was shaking his head and holding up his hands. "Whoa, wait a second. No, Death was used to having his friends hang on his every word when he was talking about ideas for the ride and the story, so this brought him up short. He reminded himself who he was talking to. Sorry, he said. Got ahead of myself, look. Lester said, prodding at the printer. This thing is its own thing. We re about more than the ride here. I know you really like it, and that's very cool, but there's no way that everything I do from now on is going to be about that fucking thing. It was a lark, it's cool, it's got its own momentum. But these boxes are going to be their own thing. I want to show people how to take control of the stuff in their living rooms, not advertise my little commercial project to them. Death cool DNT makes sense out of this. It sounded like Lester didn't like the ride. How was that possible? I don't get it. He said at last. Lester was making him look like an idiot in front of Lacey, too. He didn't like how this was going at all. Lester picked up a screwdriver. You see this? It's a tool. You can pick it up and you can unscrew stuff or screw stuff in. You can use the handle for a hammer. You can use the blade to open paint cans. You can throw it away, loan it out, or paint it purple and frame it. He thumped the printer. This thing is a tool. Too, but it's not your tool. It belongs to someone else. Disney. It isn't interested in listening to you or obeying you. It doesn't want to give you more control over your life. This thing reminds me of life before Fatkins. It was my very own personal body, but it wasn't under my control. What's the word the academics use? Agency. I didn't have any agency. It didn't matter what I did. I was just this fat thing that my brain had to lug around behind it, listening to its never-ending complaints and aches and pains. If you don't control your life, you miserable. Think of the people who don't get to run their own lives. Prisoners. Reform school kids, mental patients. There's something inherently awful about living like that. Autonomy makes us happy. He thumped the top of the printer again. So here's this stupid thing, which Disney gives you for free. It looks like a tool, like a thing that you use to better your life, but in reality, it's a tool that Disney uses to control your life. You can program it. You can change the channel. It doesn't even have an off switch. That's what gets me exercised. I want to redesign this thing so it gets converted from something that controls to something that gives you control. Lester's eyes shone. Death hurt from head to toe, from the climb and the aftermath of the beating, and the life he lived. Lester was telling him that the ride wasn't important to him anymore, that he'd be doing this other thing with the printer next, and then something else, and then something else. He felt a great, unexpected upwelling of bitterness at the thought. So what about the ride, the ride? I told you. I am done with it. It's time to do the next thing. You said you wanted to help out. Right, with the ride. Death said patiently, with the manner of someone talking to a child. Lester turned his back on Death. I am done with the ride. Lester said. I don't want to waste your time. It was clear he meant. You wasting my time. He bent over the printer. Lacey looked daggers at his shoulders, then turned to help Death down the stairs. His canes clattered on the narrow staircase, and it was all he could do to keep from crying. Suzanne rode the bullet train from Miami Airport in air-conditioned amusement, watching the Mickey-shaped hang straps rock back and forth. She bought herself a Mickey waffle and a bucket-sized Diet Coke in the dining car and fended off the offers of plush animatronic toys that were clearly descended from Boogie Woogie Elmo. Now she watched the kids tear ass up and down the train, or sit mesmerized by the videos and interactives set up at the ends of the cars. The train was really slick, and judging from the brochure she found in the seat pocket, there was another one from the Orlando airport. These things were like chutes leading from the luggage carousel straight into the parks. Disney had figured out how to make sure that every penny spent by its tourists went straight into its coffers. The voiceover announcements as they pulled into the station were in English, Chinese, Spanish, Farsi and Russian in that order, and displayed on the porters' red coats with brass buttons were name badges with the flags of many nations, denoting the languages they spoke. They wore mouse ears, and Suzanne, a veteran of innumerable hotels, could not dissuade one from taking her suitcase. He brought her to a coach station and saw her aboard a bus marked for the Polynesian, decorated with tiki lamps, bamboo, and palm fronds. She touched one and discovered that it was vinyl. He refused her tip as they saw her aboard, and then stood and waved her off with his white gloves and giant white smile. She had to chuckle as she pulled away, amazed at how effective these little touches were. She felt her muscles loosening, little involuntary chuckles rising in her throat. The coach was full of parents and children from all over the world, grinning and laughing and hugging and talking excitedly about the day ahead of them. The coach let them off to a group of Hawaiian shirt-clad staff who shouted aloha at them as they debarked, and picked up their luggage with swift, cheerful, relentless efficiency. Her check-in was so painless she wasn't sure it was over until a nice young lady who looked Chechen picked up her bag for her and urged her out to the grounds, which were green and lush, like nothing she'd seen since landing in Florida. She was surrounded by the hotel structures. Long houses decorated with Polynesian masks and stocked by leggy ibises and chirping tropical birds. Before her was a white sand beach fronting onto an artificial lake ringed with other luxury hotels, a gigantic 1970s Soviet A-frame building and a gingerbread-choked Victorian hotel. The lake was ringed with a monorail track and plied by handsome paddle-wheeler ferry boats. She stared gape-jawed at this until the bellhop gently tugged at her elbow, giving her a dazzling smile. Her room was the kind of thing you'd see Lucy and Ricky checking into on honeymoon in an old I Love Lucy episode. Wicker ceiling fans, bamboo furniture, a huge hot tub shaped like a seashell. Outside, a little terrace looking over the lake, with a pair of cockatoos looking quizzically at her. The bellhop waved at them and they cawed at her and flew off. Suzanne must have made a disappointed noise, because the bellhop patted her on the arm and said, "Don't worry, we feed them here. They come back all the time. Greedy birdies." She tipped the bellhop $5 once she'd been given the grand tour of the room, a tame internet connection that was kid-friendly and a likewise censored video-on-demand service. Delivery pizza or sushi, information on park hours, including the dazzling array of extras she could purchase. It turned out that resort guests were eligible to purchase priority passes for boarding rides ahead of the plebes, and for entering parks early and staying late. This made Suzanne feel right at home. It was very Russian in its approach: the more you spent, the better your time was. She bought it all the fast passes and priority cards, all of it loaded into a grinning Mickey on a lanyard, a wireless pendant that would take care of her everywhere she went in the park, letting her spend money like water. Thus girded, she consulted with her bellhop some more and laid out an itinerary. Once she de-showered, she found she didn't want to wear any of her European tailored shorts and blouses. She wanted to disappear into the great American mass. The hotel gift shop provided her with a barkcloth Hawaiian shirt decorated with tessellated Disney trademarks and a big pair of loose shorts, and once she donned them, she saw that she could be anyone now, any tourist in the park. A pair of cheap sunglasses completed the look, and she paid for it all by waving her Mickey necklace at the register, spending money like water. She passed the rest of the day at the Magic Kingdom, taking a ferry from the hotel's pier to the Victorian wrought iron docks on the other side of the little artificial lake. As she cleared the turnstiles into Main Street, USA, her heart quickened. Kids rushed past her, chased by their parents' laughing calls to slow down. Balloon sellers and old-fashioned popcorn machines jostled for space in the crowd, and a brass band was marching down the street in straw boaters and red striped jackets, playing a Sousa march. She ambled up the road, peering in the adorable little shop windows. Like the shops in a fancy casino, all themed artificial facades that were, in back, all one shop, linked through the length of the street. She reached the castle before she realized it, and saw that it was shorter than it had appeared. Turning around and looking back down Main Street, she saw that the trees lining the sides of the street had been trimmed so they got progressively smaller from the gates to the castle, creating a kind of false perspective line. She laughed now, amused by the accomplishment of the little trompe-l'oeil. She squeezed past the hordes of Asian tourists taking precisely the same picture of the castle, one after another, a phenomenon she'd observed at other famous landmarks. For some Japanese shutterbigs, the holiday photo experience was as formal as the Stations of the Cross, with each picture of each landmark rigidly prescribed by custom and unwritten law. Now she was under the castle and headed for what her map assured her was Fantasyland. Just as she cleared the archway, she remembered her conversations with that Death Waits kid about Fantasyland. This was the part that had been made over as a goth area, and then remade as the happiest construction site on Earth. And so it was. The contrast was stark. From fairy castle to green-painted construction sidings. From smiling, well-turned-out cast members to construction workers with butt-crack-itis and grouchy expressions. Fantasyland was like an ugly scar on the blemish-free face of a Barbie doll. She liked it. Something about all that artifice. All that cunning work to cover up all the bodies a company like Disney would have buried under its manicured Main Street. It had given her a low level.